Mrs. Goodman.
Here.
Mr. Suda.
Yes.
Mr. Gentili.
We got enough to go over the meeting, right?
We've got a quorum.
Right. Okay. Next approval agenda. Bill, you got,
Yeah, I was looking this over and I'm kind of wondering if the new business and the old business shouldn't be transposed. Because in case there'd ever be any time that old business, somebody would want to bring up something and new business, then, you know, if you've gone past it, and due to the fact that this is something that the public can get their hands on, whenever somebody looks at that, hey, wait a minute here. And that's kind of the way I think sometimes is there something here that maybe somebody can pick at, and so whatever. So that's my thought on this. I'll relate another thought on the comments by authority later, and you'll see how I think a little more.
any comments or thoughts on what Phil suggested, flip-flop, 9 for 10? Finish the old/unfinished business before we go into new business, in our agenda format?
Well, if you know, I would tell you, that's probably your decision as chair.
I've
Okay.
seen it both ways.
Okay, I, just to make the one board member happy. and the
I
rest
have
of
no
us-
heartburn with the concept at all.
Okay,
I don't need to read it, but.
so the only thing I was gonna say, just to clear things up, instead of just calling it old business, we'll call it old/unfinished business.
Bingo.
Bingo?
Bingo.
Do I hear a vote for a yes on that
You
change?
don't need to vote.
Okay, just go ahead and do it. Okay, public comment, I don't see we have any public here today, so we'll move on. Approval of minutes, did everybody get a copy of the last month's minutes? For Monday, February 10th?
We usually do, make a motion to approve the agenda.
Oh, okay, that's correct, that's
I'll
correct.
make that motion. That is with, you want the things flip-flop today?
Right, flip-flop,
Okay, I
9
move
for
we
10.
approve the agenda with 10 and 9 reversed. And we call it old/unfinished business.
Do I hear a second to that? Okay. Do I hear a vote? All in favor?
Aye.
All those not in favor? Okay, motion passed. Okay, moving on again to the minutes. February 10th, 2020. Everybody had a chance to review the minutes from the last meeting? Comments, changes, adjustments? Not, do I hear a motion to approve as presented?
I'll make that motion.
Do I hear a second? Okay. Do I hear a motion to approve what we have? The minutes of, no, I mean, I should say, do I hear a vote to approve the minutes as presented? All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
All those not in charge? say no. All those who disagree? Negative, okay. Okay, moving on to the treasury report. And let's first look at January's 2020 revenue and expenses. We had a adjustment made on that last
Yeah,
time
so I
around.
fixed the marketing public charters, 25.
Right,
And then I did attach a schedule of adjustments, is that second page?
the backside of the first page. Okay.
So those are activities that happened after September, but they were before September. So those are those adjustments that we talked about.
So with all these adjustments and everything else, are we gonna have any more adjustments? Because I was reading through this and to me it was getting kind of confusing.
No, this should be good.
Okay, do I hear a motion to approve the January 2020 revenues and expenses as amended or adjusted?
So moved.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second
Okay, can we have a roll call on that, please?
Mr. Dents,
Yes.
Ms. Goodman,
that. Yes.
Mr. Hall,
Yes.
Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
Mr. Suda.
Yes.
Okay, moving on to the February accounts payable. Everybody had a chance to review that? Questions, comments?
The only comment that I have is that E1, that's actually a state reimbursement grant, and we did get that check for the 22-106.
Oh, it's a check, not a bill?
Well, it's a bill, so we paid the invoice, and then we
But we've
also
already
gotten,
gotten the
yeah, the
paycheck.
check
Oh,
back
okay.
from the
Because I know that was,
state.
Barry, if you could turn that down some, that'd be wonderful.
It's down as
That's-
low as it
that's
goes.
Okay.
At some point, just tell me to turn it off if we're waiting longer.
Go on.
I agree.
is that,
Give it till 10.
5 more minutes and then, okay.
12, 10, and if he doesn't call in, we'll,
okay. Let me go bring it up again, Tom. Let's do that. Okay, so that's what that was, because I had a question on that 22,000 there. Now, one more question, this is just out of curiosity and so on. I see you buying sand from Carl's Excavating. And I know that's probably for the airport and you saw, so on. I was just thinking, well, why do we get that free from the county? They got the big sand pit up there at the new structure.
so you gotta pay for trucking.
Well, it's trucking, but this
So
is more than just trucking.
it's more than that. So we used to get it from the road commission.
Oh, okay.
The sand that, it's the quality of the sand. We're actually required to have sifted sand
Okay, that's,
because, and what we found is that there's a lot of rocks actually in that sand. And we've actually had one broken window in the terminal because of a rock that got then picked up by a prop that then kicked it into the window. And that's the reason you have to have sifted sand, is you can't have what's called FOD, which is foreign object debris on your runways, because props will throw it around, jets can ingest it, which is a bad thing.
good enough for me. Hadn't thought of that. So anyway.
And I will add though, it's remarkably hard to actually find sifted sand because sand is so prevalent around here, it's just like no one goes that extra mile. So this is like I think the third or fourth vendor that we've kind of rotated through on sand, and are finally actually getting a product that we need.
Okay.
Everyone says, oh yeah, it's good, and then we
So
have
Carl
rocks.
actually has a sand screen out there, sifter.
I don't know if they get it chucked in that way, I don't know where that happens, but it's,
But anyway.
yeah.
Right. In fact, once upon a time, I was looking for sand to be used on a train engine where they throw sand down for the wheels for traction. And I think I came up with the only requirement that was required, it had to be screened to prevent the rocks and so on, so you never find sand. Okay, do I hear a motion to approve the February accounts payable as presented? Okay, do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay. Do we have a roll call on that, please?
Mr. Suda,
Yes.
Mr. Dents,
Yes.
Ms. Goodman, Mr. Hall,
Yes.
Mr. Peterson.
Yes.
And next up is the February financial statement. Everybody's got a copy of that to review it. It's in a little different format.
I don't know if you wanna talk to the format, Susan,
yes.
since.
So would you run us through the format there?
So, it's kind of expenditures on the second part of that. So this is a snapshot as of February 29th of where the airport is. This report was taken right out of BNSA, so there's no manual putting things in and adjusting or anything like that. These are the true numbers right out of our system where all the revenues are put and all the expenses are put. So there's, the first column is the activity for February. This is all the activity for the month of February. The second column is a previous year to date. So, this is through, January, and then the third column is February 29th, where you're really at for your fiscal year to date. There's the budget number and then a percent used for your budget. And then at the very bottom, you can see where it has the total revenues, total expenditures, and then that bottom number is where we're at for each of the time frames.
And just to add to that is,
So I worked with the auditors.
okay, I'm sorry. So, go ahead.
The auditor was not happy with the other one because what was happening is there was, so like, for example, if I would have been doing the same format, which I wasn't happy with, you would be adding things from March in here. So then you'd have February, March mixed into your current column. So, we're reporting for February, so we should only
We have
report for
up to
February. Right, exactly. So this is, true to form of what we should be using. He was very happy with this when I went through it with him. The second page is that PFC account, which is kind of the same, but I'll be working on updating this a little bit better. And then that third page is a trial balance. So your trial balance shows everything that, is associated here for the airport. It's got your assets, it's got your fund equity, it's got your revenues, and it has your expenditures. And then at the bottom shows where you're truly at this point in time.
Which one is that?
Looks like, right here, it's your trial balance. It looks like this. So,
Oh, it says trial in the top
yeah,
column.
let's try it out.
Does normal, abnormal mean anything other than common sense would tell you what it means?
Right, yeah, that's it.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I did, the only thing that, I need to find out is, public charters is a little behind. So I just need to know if it's a good probability that they're going to pay us for last month, because then I can book that as a receivable and that would show up on that trial balance then as an accounts receivable. I didn't want to book it until I talked to you and found out for sure if you've talked to them and where we're at with that.
Yes, I would put that.
Okay, so then next month that'll show up on that trial balance as an account
If it
receivable.
comes.
No, even if it doesn't, if it's a good probability that they're gonna pay, you can go ahead and book it. It won't show up here, it's gonna show up on that trial balance as an asset, as an accounts receivable. And then once they pay it, then it gets reversed off, but that way it's listed, that's a receivable that the airport has a high probability that we're going to receive it. So, so then that number at the bottom would be, $8,000 less. So, that's all.
I've got one question that's, when I was looking at this the other day. Like when we go back to the February 2020 revenues expense page, and you have the previous months, which I presume is January, and it
Well, it
shows,
has January and February, so that was my issue.
oh, that's January and February,
Yes,
and,
so there was things that were being added in, like when we would do the accounts payable, they would add them in there even though at the end of January, they weren't in there, so we were manually adding things in there, which I didn't agree with, I didn't like, but it's how it's always been done. So I discussed it with the auditor when he was here, and he always said he never understood those reports. So this is what we worked with, and this is what we really should be doing. So there's, this column here for February is just February, everything that happened for February, the month of February.
On this page we're looking at.
Yeah, that's page, yeah.
So when it says the activity for February
Right,
two
it's
twenty-nine, it's just
truly
February.
February, there's no January, there's no March, it's truly February.
So the previous month is not truly January?
On this report, it is now the previous month balance.
It's
So
January.
that's like, that's actually, that isn't just January, it's, October through January.
Oh, okay, because I was
Right.
looking at
No,
that page
yeah.
versus this page here,
Right, no,
and there's quite a significant difference there.
right, so that's like your year-to-date through January, and then the next column is through February. Mhm,
So the next column is actually January 2020
Right,
and February 2020.
Or is that going back to October? The third
No,
column?
the second column goes back
The
up to,
second and the third. go back
right,
to
and then the
October.
third one is truly your year-to-date, so it's October through February. Mhm. So like, we can put, instead of having the previous month's balance, year-to-date, I guess I should have put year-to-date, but we could do like just a previous month if you wanna compare month to month, we can do that.
well, that's what we had on the old report.
On the old one, yes.
Right.
Mhm.
I think that makes sense because
We'll do
The-
it
put the
previous
columns
month.
2 and 3 are similar enough
Right,
that there's not a
right,
lot of
right.
added value.
Yeah,
Because the other column, the third column, year-to-date, comes all the way
Right, so then,
back past
like,
from
next month,
October.
I'll have it, so it'll be, you know, activity for March, and then the previous month will just be February.
Right,
all February.
Right,
And then the third one will be your year-to-date.
right, which started in October.
Yep. Mhm.
So maybe I'll put that up there, year-to-date from October.
No, year-to-date is,
Year-to-date
that's the
is
fiscal year.
It's the fiscal
Okay.
year.
Then maybe put fiscal date, or fiscal year underneath, year-to-date fiscal year. Because year-to-date, in my mind, could be January 1 to December 31st. Why don't you put fiscal year-to-date, balance fiscal year? There we go.
Just a comment I'll add is, you know, between Susan, myself, and the auditor, we really got to the point of, why are these reports this way? Because the reports we were using, they've been that way for the 12 years I've been here. I don't know how long before that they were, and, you know, it's just like, let's simplify it, because there was a lot of double entry of information as opposed to just being able to run the report off the system. It was managed in an external spreadsheet, and that makes no sense, especially when no one even can understand why we're doing it that way, other than it's the way we've always done it. So I think these are a lot of good changes to
Oh, good.
reduce the workload and make things clearer, as long as you as a board are getting the information you need.
Well, I'm for sticking with this new format, see what it goes. In fact, I was.
When your auditor tells you, you kinda don't have a lot of choices.
You know,
Oh, come on, fight it.
because I know I was gonna make an appointment with you to go down and have you talk me through this. Every time I think I've got it somewhat straight.
I think this will be much easier, like, for reading purposes too, it's just, it's the snapshot at the end of the month, whatever month we're at, this is where we're at. You know, and that other column is, this is truly what it is for the fiscal year.
Okay,
And then the trial balance is just, you know, a summary of everything on where you're at. Your assets, your liabilities, and your expenses. And I think that's easier to read, understand.
okay, any more questions on this new format? And I think we took a vote to approve it already, didn't we? No?
No.
Okay, well, let me have a motion to approve the February revenue expenses as presented in the new format.
Did you do the accounts payable?
Yeah, we did that.
So moved.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Dents?
Yes.
Mr. Studa?
Yes.
Mr. Ha?
Yes.
Ms. Goodman? Yes. Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Okay. Motion moving on to committee reports, discussion. To my knowledge, there was no executive committee meeting? No
To my
budget?
knowledge, none of the committees met this past
Correct.
month.
Okay. Barry, your turn.
Okay. For some reason, I can't get the monitor to be working, so just get to paper.
The virus.
We're doing good so far.
Don't
I was
say that.
I was making bets
Good
earlier as to how
afternoon.
much time we're actually gonna spend talking about airport stuff. So going into my report, so no accidents or incidents for the month. Second page with regards to enplanements and on-time performance. Better than January. Instead of having half of our flights canceled, we only had a third of our flights canceled. And we had therefore more passengers actually flying. I'm not even gonna go into any more detail on that. We all are aware of those challenges right at this point. And actually on the third page, the airfares, I mean, again, there's nothing really relevant there other than airfares are crashing, and it was, in addition to these, I also have been starting to kind of look at fares out of O'Hare, anticipating that might be in our future. And of the 20 cities here, I think there were only 2 or 3 of the 20 that had round-trip fares more than $100, including like Los Angeles was $97 round trip. I mean, just,
I've seen Frontier
It's-
fares that are
yeah, it's
unbelievable.
just. So I don't think there's anything there you can point to that's of long-term relevance.
Well, my biggest concern on any of this with the fares, unless you're gonna bring it up later, I wanna know about the sterile or non-sterile. and if
That's-
been reset.
That's coming up later, yep. And just the short answer is we're good.
Just a ironic type thought I had here. Here the fares are so low, you can travel any place for a few bucks now, but you can't travel.
Well, that's
Not officially.
true
Well, I know,
yet.
but-
And yet being, I think, key there.
Right.
So, state winter conference, so the 19th and 20th of last month in Lansing was the winter airports conference. It was actually very well attended, probably the most I've seen at one of these conferences. A lot of the sessions kind of really focused on education and STEM and how airports can really be working with the schools and the community to really encourage science education, because there is this pilot shortage, mechanic shortage, all of these things that, you know, really, so the entire industry is looking for ways to encourage growth in that area. So that was kind of a theme. There were 2 other things that came up in the conference that struck me as being important. One was a presentation. It essentially was talking about a construction project at the Grand Rapids Airport. They're basically in the process of replacing their apron around their terminal, which presents a lot of interesting challenges at an airport of that size, because it's not like you can just shut the airport down and, you know, operate it, so you have to kind of take it in a piecemeal fashion. So it ended up being, I think, planned for 8 phases of a construction project. But what was really interesting in the presentation was they started planning this back in 2015. And since then, they've been growing at 15% a year. So in the midst of this project, they're now, this summer, gonna start a terminal expansion. So the project changed in its nature, because now not only are you replacing existing, you're also needing to accommodate what's coming next, because that project got moved up like 4 years. Really fascinating, and oh, that's what I forgot. I'll have to go grab that at some point. It's how much growth they are undergoing, and how really with Allegiant being, I mean, Allegiance hubs. Now, that doesn't mean hub in kind of the same way for a traditional airline, but Allegiance got 65 some employees there, they've got maintenance there, they have 4 aircraft based there. I mean, it's really interesting what is all going on down there. After the presentation, I talked to the guy from Grand Rapids who gave the presentation, he's on their staff, and just asked him where they see themselves growing to. Because at some point, it could negatively impact us and Muskegon because we're the 2 closest essential air service airports. Currently, the regulations or the rules around funding and subsidies for essential air service are that if you are more than 210 miles from a medium or large hub, and the closest medium and large hubs to us are Detroit and Chicago, and we are more than 210 miles from those, we are not subject to realistically any significant subsidy limits. If you fall within 210 miles, now some very significant subsidy caps come into play, and a number of airports are being eliminated from essential air service because of those subsidy caps. Like a lot of things in the federal government, those subsidy caps aren't indexed for inflation. So over time, they become harder and harder to, meet because those don't grow, but yet costs and everything else grows. But that's the way a lot of things work in the industry. So my question was, Grand Rapids, are you looking at becoming a medium hub airport? And their answer was, it is not on their radar that they think they will become a medium hub airport anytime soon. They're about 15% kind of below that threshold of what would be a medium hub. And the definition of medium hub in the FAA's speak is a large hub is any hub that, or any airport that carries more than 1% of the total passengers in the country. A medium hub is anything that's more than 0.25%, between 1/4 and 1%. They're about 15% below that. And there's about 10 airports between them and being that. And what they're saying is that segment of sized airports is where the growth is, or was until this past week. And therefore, while they're growing tremendously, all of those other airports kind of in that range are also growing. So it's not like they're catching up in any particular fast manner. So they don't see that on their radar of them achieving that anytime soon. So it was interesting all around that conversation. And I also reached out to him and asked him if he could send me a copy of a sample week of their schedule this summer that I could then share with prospective airline bidders to kind of follow through on the board's desire for bidders to contemplate what service or partial service into Grand Rapids might look like. So, and I've got a further update of that coming up. And then the other thing is the PFAS, or this nasty emerging chemical that I've been talking about and the industry's been talking about for a couple of years now. So last year, now a little over a year ago, in the lame duck session of the state legislature, there was a special $400,000 funding from Eagle in cooperation with MDOT Aeronautics to basically get to all airports that have this chemical on field, equipment that allows them to not be required to dispense it into the environment for the testing purposes. Now, that's actually the next item, so I won't talk any more about that. And that was $400,000 last year. This year in the budget, the governor and legislature have approved $4 million for these same airports. So basically, an order of magnitude more to now begin testing at all airports. So that is coming this year for us. I got a call last week from someone at Eagle that basically just started that. Unfortunately, unlike last year where it was kind of just joint with MDOT, this is more a pure Eagle item. So instead of what happened last year is MDOT administered all the grants and did all the paperwork. This year it looks like each airport is individually going to have to come up with a grant agreement and work with Eagle, and MDOT really won't be playing kind of that traditional role they do for us smaller airports. So there's a $200,000 to $300,000 project on our horizon this year that at this point is really completely unspecified. But the funding is there for it. So that's what's coming this year that I picked up from this conference. As it relates to last year's money, $21,000 that was actually mentioned in the financial reports, we've got the test equipment. It was installed last week. We've been trained on it. We received the funding, the grant reimbursement for the equipment itself. I've applied in this year's cycle through MDOT for another grant that will cover the training and the installation. Those should be awarded at the Aeronautics Commission meeting this month, which I think is later this week. And then once we get that grant executed, then I can basically go and submit for reimbursement for the remaining expenses. We haven't been yet billed for those. We got billed for the equipment, and I requested to be billed separately just to keep things clear, since two different grant sources were paying for the different parts of it. No current update on the fuel system monitor. Moving forward, looking at May, we are required to have our triennial airport emergency exercise by the end of May. I've been working with Brian Gutowski, the current undersheriff, former emergency management coordinator. He's kind of still taking lead role on this project. We had a meeting actually last Friday afternoon to kind of talk through some planning. As a result of that meeting, Brian's going to follow up with my FAA inspector and basically ask for a postponement on that, just because while they're not anticipating May being necessarily an issue, all the planning work that needs to be done now to make that happen is going to be taking resources away from other things. So that's planned. The May 30th was chosen because that is the window when we're going to be shut down because of the runway resurfacing anyway. So that's why that date was picked. However, we try to coordinate every 3 years that exercise with the recurrent firefighter training that we do, where we actually bring on site as opposed to sending our guys off to another airport to join their training. We bring on site the mobile training unit that our specialists is who we've been using the last number of years. And they were not available on the 30th. So they're going to be here on May 9th. Both of those, that training as well as the exercise, have to be done by the end of May, unless, things. So we're gonna actually have two things going on in May. I know the city fire department and the township plan to be joining us on May 9th, as well as on May 30th. It will probably be city, township, East Lake, possibly Filer, and possibly Onekama, all working on that along with law enforcement. The hospital, EMS, it's becoming, I mean, we do it every 3 years, so every 3 years we get a little bit better in what we're doing, and, you know, it's actually, working much smoother than it has been in the past. Especially, we've always had challenges in the past, really getting engagement with EMS and the hospital, and I think under Munson, that's actually improved significantly.
So Barry, this is going to be, presumed fairly well publicized, because I think the last time this was done, there were some people that,
There are always people,
Right, so
especially
I
on,
know-
well, either of these, but especially on the night where you actually see flames.
right, that's what I'm saying, I think that was a
You know,
problem, some of the
It's
folks.
always in the newspaper, it's
Okay.
always, but
Okay.
yeah, it's actually part of the planning is
Okay.
to, because the airport will be closed, they requested permission to actually block the entrance and station probably a sheriff deputy there, just to, people stop and they can explain what's going on. Land acquisition, the grant amendment number 1, you approved last month. That's come back and been signed by the state, so we are complete on that. I need to work with Susan on getting the expenses under that amendment put together, paid and then submitted. We will be, once that gets wrapped up, doing a second grant for the legal expenses, or a second amendment. And then we still have this $10,000 sitting out there for reimbursement that we'll get someday when we have a project that, and it should be this year's ALP update project, we should be able to incorporate the remaining expenses that were incurred a few years ago into that grant reimbursement. I've already touched on the fact that our runway rehabilitation project is still on schedule, May 26th through June 5th. One item that came up in our airport inspection, they are requiring that we have some additional signs posted on basically roads the FAA uses that intersect with the runways and taxiways. Basically a sign that says stop, don't proceed. So we're working on getting those incorporated into that project. The due date that I have to get that done by is mid-June, and that was chosen to align with this project. And I've already mentioned that the airline schedule has been updated to take that closure into account.
That was May what, through June 6th?
It's basically noon, the Tuesday after Memorial Day. So basically, the idea is we will basically be able to handle any outgoing passengers that are still returning Tuesday morning, close at noon, and then reopen the following Friday, 10 days later at noon. So we have any incoming for that weekend. So what dates that do on
June
there?
26th, or May 26th through June 5th.
Yep. Wildlife survey, no update there, but it's been completed. I do have an update though on our this year's project, which is our updated airport layout plan. So Pre Newhoff has been starting to work on it, but a hiccup has come up in that the FAA is now requiring that this project have an independent fee estimate. Basically, that says the consulting costs for the project are in line with industry averages for the work. Historically, the state does that on behalf of airports. But because of a rule change, because the state receives grant funding for similar types of things, they are now not allowed to do that task anymore. So we have to basically pay somebody money to then tell us that what we're doing is okay. And that's a new business item coming up later today to do that, because this really can't go forward any more than it has until that is in place. So, that's kind of everything under the capital side. Any questions on any of that before I move on to airline issues? Hearing none, so,
Wait a minute, the layout plan was
yes.
for the signage and stuff around the,
No, the airport layout plan is basically, it's kind of the equivalent of an airport master plan.
oh, okay, so it's different than the other
It
thing,
is,
okay.
it is very
Okay.
different. Our current one is 20 years old, 21 now, it was done in 99. And the FAA basically says you should do one every 20 years, so this is an update of that. But it incorporates things not only kind of as things exist, but also as we would like them. So that will have our future runway extension on it, as the current one does, but you know, if anything's changed in the last 20 years as to how those are designed or laid out, that will be incorporated in.
Okay,
So airline service or air service update. So the Beech 1900 that has been talked about now for 2 years. The plane does exist. It was actually here earlier this month. They were doing some proving runs with it, with both the plane and the crew that's been hired to fly it. So it does exist. I was on it. It's actually, it's nice. The current schedule is, they are scheduled today for the FAA to sign off on the aircraft. Kind of all the final paperwork on that should happen today. Then there's a need for a scheduled check ride with the crew, and that is planned for this weekend. Now, that assumes that the FAA is still performing tasks like that. Especially that check ride, that's kind of not something you can work from home and work on, you gotta be actually out in the field to do that. So as long as the FAA is still performing those tasks, that should happen this weekend, with the plan then to have service with that by the end of this month.
I
Now-
glanced through this, I thought it said the plane doesn't exist.
So, that's really only a 2-week delay from what I told you last month, but, you know, we've been having these 2-week, 4-week, 6-week delays for forever. So, whether that happens or not, especially given the uncertainty that's going on in the world right now, there is some good news, and that's on the next page. So first I'll give kind of where we've been since the last meeting. So Ultimate Jet resumed service some days, generally midweek days, as of March 1st. So since March 1st, we have had TSA, the need for TSA some days of the week. So our TSA issues are behind us, at least for the time being. And then 45 North has been operating at King Air on the remaining days. So since March 1st, we've had basically flights every day we're supposed to have flights. That wasn't true in February. We had more flights than we did in January, but there were still days flights were canceled. The good news, the silver lining and maybe what's going on is because Ultimate Jet's other routes that basically aren't subsidized and base air, the passenger fares have to cover the expenses, since the number of passengers have plummeted, they've canceled all of their other service. So they now find themselves in a position where they have multiple airplanes and multiple crews and nothing to do with them. So as of tomorrow, we will have Ultimate Jet and the Dornier basically based here for the indefinite future, so we can begin operating regardless of whether or not the 1900 comes online. We've got the 30-seat jet here for the foreseeable future, because at least that can generate some revenue for them. The TSA
Tournament
already.
reservations got canceled too,
Huh?
didn't they?
What?
Tournament reservations got called off too.
Yes, so yeah, they're looking for business.
so very, very, like you said before, the 1900 may not exist.
TSA service, I already touched on that, so I won't repeat that.
That's good news.
I mentioned last month that DOT, we yet again ran into a hiccup with grant reimbursement for the subsidy payments. That's gotten through, so we're current again with that. I haven't yet submitted February's, I just got the information from Public Charters last week, and we'll see how smoothly that goes. Summer schedule is drafted, that's not that different from what I reported last month. Talking about a schedule that starts June 20th at this point, with things changing as rapidly as they are, that schedule's probably not going to be published until there's a little more clarity as to what's going to go on in this industry. But it's sitting there ready. Any questions on current carrier, current air service, before I switch over to the EAS selection process for our next round?
So on this schedule, it's ready to go out there and so on, and even though we won't be using it until June 20th, and we don't know what's going on in the world and so on, it probably wouldn't hurt them to put it out, you know, kind of in a
But at the
normal
same time,
timeframe.
no
Yeah.
one's booking.
I know, but still it's out there.
So yes, I mean, in a normal year, we would have pressure to get that summer
Right.
schedule out, because now would be when people are starting to book for summer. But that's not happening right now, at
Okay.
least not for the next few days. So then moving forward to the EAS selection process. So the RFP from DOT was actually released just a few hours after our last meeting, the end of that day. That original RFP had bids due this Thursday. One of the air carriers, Air Choice One, has requested an extension, and that's been granted, so now bids are due March 30th. And just kind of monitoring things, if it comes down to it, I might request an indefinite postponement of that, because I'll give you an example. Well, I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit. I'll jump ahead anyway. SkyWest, basically generally a large regional carrier providing service to most of the large airlines. Given that they're cutting back 40-50% or more on flights in the next couple of months, SkyWest really isn't probably going to be spending much time thinking about something like this when they're trying to figure out everything else that's going on in their multiple 100-plane network. So I'm concerned that if bids stay due and things don't settle down, that we might just be overlooked just because too many other higher priority things are going on. So just kind of taking that, I mean, we've got, it's 2 weeks, but still, there's not that much time. The RFP, as it came out, wasn't everything I hoped, but it's actually better than I think the RFP was 2 years ago. Specifically, I had requested that it explicitly discuss an option for carriers to bid seasonally, so kind of a summer bid and then an off-season bid, such that potentially we might have two different air carriers with potentially two different types of planes handling our significant difference in seasonal demand. They didn't include that language. They did include language that says an air carrier could bid different airplanes at different times of the year and to take into account our seasonal needs. But realistically, there is no air carrier that just operates small and big planes, so. However, the good thing is that in the past, there was language in there that said we were entitled to 3 round trips a day with 9-seat aircraft. In the summer, we need 6 or more to handle our load. In the winter, 2 is probably sufficient. So that language around 3 caused a lot of the bidders last round to realistically bid less than meets our needs, especially in the summer. they've removed that, and basically it's just more generic that it meets the needs of our demand. So that's good, that it's not, there's not a limitation in there that's artificially restricting us.
So they modified from that one then?
No, from what the one 2 years ago
Oh, okay.
had language in it that was
Okay.
more restrictive than
Okay.
that one does. So that's good. So where things stand, I've sent basically a packet of information to all potential bidders. There's a 4-page document in there that kind of goes through what the board requested, the 5 criteria that the board identified back in, I think, in November. I also include language in there about Grand Rapids and them contemplating that. I include basically our daily employment data from 2016 through 2018, including averages per day of the year and min-max. And then I also took that data and tried to fit it into a schedule of how many flights per week would you need in January versus July to accommodate that. Just trying to do as much of the legwork for them such that they can come back with something that's hopefully realistic. So that all went out to them. I've also sent out what I'll call a draft fee schedule, because they need to start thinking about what it's going to cost to operate here. And that's also a new business for you to formally adopt or change. And I let them know that it was draft and that it would be finalized today. Basically that fee schedule for the next 2 years. So on the list here, I've basically 7 potentials. I've sent information to everybody. I've heard back, and I think at least as of Friday, the first 4 all intend to bid. I've not heard anything really back in any definitive way from the other 3. Some other kind of regional information that's going on. So Ironwood in the UP just did their bid process. They haven't yet been awarded, but they've been with Air Choice 1 for 6 years. And they had 4 bidders. They had Air Choice 1, Boutique, Denver Air Connection, and Southern. And their airport decided they wanted to go with Boutique. So that's a change in carrier there. And when we get to later in this process and looking at the qualities of each aircraft or each carrier, that surprises me a little, but it also doesn't surprise me because I think, like us, they are really focused on that interline connectivity, and that's something that Boutique brings to the table. So that's things that are out there that I'm monitoring and communicating with. I will talk about it now because I don't think I have another note, and that's with the Grand Rapids. So in working with some of the carriers and trying to explain what the board's desire is, I've been communicating it as such that the board would like the carriers to look into feasibility of having at least 1 flight a day, either terminate in Grand Rapids or connect through Grand Rapids on its way to Chicago or potentially whatever hub they might envision. The challenge with that is looking at the actual schedule in Grand Rapids. The best time for that flight to get into Grand Rapids and to leave Grand Rapids would be to get there about 5:30 in the morning, which means leaving here about 5 in the morning, because between 6 and 8, they've got about 20, basically every plane that they overnight there are 24 planes that overnight in Grand Rapids every night. So they've got 24 flights that go out kind of in that morning block. And then the opposite happens in the evening, between 11 and 12:30 in the morning, you've got all of those planes coming back in. So to get to all the destinations that Grand Rapids flies to, if you're doing one flight a day, to accommodate that, it's really a schedule that probably isn't realistic. I mean, a 5 a.m. departure here, getting in at 1 in the morning type thing. Between that, between those kind of two major banks, everything else is kind of just sprinkled throughout the day. And, you know, if you look at kind of a 4-hour window, which is kind of a general connection window, and then finding a window where a plane could come in and then another window where they could leave, where you end up with, oh, I could get a flight to Denver on this one, but on the return, I don't have a return flight from Denver. So you're really looking at approximately like 5 destinations that you could reliably get to. I've excluded O'Hare because we would be flying to O'Hare anyway, so you wouldn't go to Grand Rapids to then catch an American flight to O'Hare. That doesn't make sense.
But if you got a bump out of O'Hare not to go in,
Yep.
and you were scheduled to fly with American for sake
Yep.
of they would be more apt if they had seating to accommodate you in Grand Rapids if you could get to there, as opposed to, oh, well, I'm gonna stop.
I am not
That's
saying
the
that there
catch.
aren't, I'm just saying it is challenging unless we really take those really outside bookmark flights. So I'm just mentioning it to you, just kind of want to get your current thoughts on that, what you think makes sense, so that I can communicate to people that, to carriers that ask. Because I've really made it clear that if they want to look good in the selection process, they should at least talk about Grand Rapids, because it's something the board has asked for, and not to ignore the wishes of the board. But I want to make sure that I'm communicating clearly that I'm not, as to what your expectations are.
Harry, does Grand Rapids and the schedules that you've looked at and so on have a wave going out in the afternoon, like 3, 4, 5 o'clock?
No,
after nothing?
the two waves are that morning out and that late night back. Everything else in the day is pretty much spread around.
Through the day.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I mean, obviously, there are times that are a little bit more, but it's not significant.
You started to name the midday options, I thought. You said excluding O'Hare, and I thought you were gonna say what their midday flights kind of tended towards, but maybe that wasn't.
I mean, I'm just kind of looking at the entire day and just trying to pick a couple windows. Obviously, just because I pick a window doesn't mean that a carrier could have a plane there at that time, because it has to work in the whole process. But in general, you're gonna get about 5 destinations that you could fly to and come back from. And generally, you know, things that are American and United, other than the recovery issue of if you're misconnecting, to be able to come in there and still get back, you're not getting any additional destinations. However, you know, Delta isn't, you've got a couple to their hubs, at least Atlanta, that would be, you know, somewhat desirable. And then all of the Allegiant stuff is opened up, because Allegiant does not fly into O'Hare. However, Spirit does, which is kind of in that same vein. Spirit and Frontier are more O'Hare.
So I know we flew out the last time, we had, I don't wanna say it like it was a 2 o'clock, if I'm maybe off 1 hour.
Yep.
We wound up with about an hour delay. It was on a Frontier flight direct to Phoenix, but that was, say, 2 p.m. Wound up being 3, or 3 and wound up being 4, irrelevant. But I mean, the place was an absolute zoo. You know, they need an expansion for seating.
And
It's
they
just-
are
it's
starting that
crazy.
this summer.
Meaning GR?
Yes,
Okay.
it's unbelievable, the volume that's going through that airport now compared to what it was. Yeah, you get your initial waves each way, but then it's where can you connect?
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, I'm not hearing any strong one way or another. I will continue basically what I've been doing and
We'll see what they come back
communicate
with.
that
Right.
it's still important for the board and just see what they come back with.
Because if nothing else, something twice a week, leaving out of here at 10 o'clock, and then fish what they want in Grand Rapids from there. But having the option anyway.
I am quite certain that Cape Air, because they've already started running numbers on that, will be including that as an option
Okay,
of some sort.
so let's see what they come up
Yep.
with.
The only other thing I would say in regard, and it's old information, but any of the larger carriers, that 10-month real-time snapshot I always talk about with Frontier, depending on schedule and plane, makes a heck of a difference. And what, it
Yes.
shows what we
Oh, no,
can do.
That is definitely
That's
in.
just it.
That is in the information I'm providing
Okay.
them, because they're not necessarily,
Yeah,
someone who hasn't worked with us before doesn't even know of that history, so.
exactly, thank you.
Yep. Other things that I've reported recently that were issues are now becoming less of an issue. So the ILS, our instrument landing system, my last month's report and the month before that were that it had been taken out of service. Well, once the FAA dug into it a bit deeper, they determined, oh, we don't have to take it completely out of service, we can just limit it. But the way it's being limited basically covers our major uses. People can use it to come in and land. They can't use it for certain routings it's called waypoints, is that waypoints? To come in because of some of the issues with the VOR, the other piece of equipment that's got some limitations. So they made a lot of hoopla. Really, they didn't need to if they had done their job correctly to begin with. So that is back online, usable with some limitations.
So it's 80% usable?
I would put it in that. And
Usable for what we need.
for what we
Okay.
really need it for, limited visibility coming in when you're lined up to
Okay.
come in,
Okay.
Is
it can be used for that
that
again.
a permanent situation?
They still need to go through the process of changing the procedures not to rely on the VOR, because the VOR is planned to be decommissioned in either 2021 or 2022.
That's what I was asking.
So, but this gives them the time to do that as opposed to making us suffer during that window. And then marketing, had a conversation with Right Side Design this morning on this. We're kind of just staying status quo, which is very limited. We haven't been spending much because of our service issues. But until either, the air transportation system is shut down, or improvements come into place, we're just kind of staying where we are. And obviously, if we're shut down, we'll just stop marketing. There's no reason to be marketing if you're not even flying. But if, things keep operating and, the 1900 or the summer schedule gets published, those are opportunities for us to start ratcheting that up again. Regardless though, the plan for this year is to update our website in anticipation of a new carrier, so we need to get really started in that process, because that's more of a long-term thing, so.
Now Barry, when you say service shuts down, are you talking the big picture?
The big picture, yes. I mean, there's a lot of discussion right now that if we're closing restaurants, that we should be
Above and
closing
beyond what
airports
we're
too.
doing here?
Yes,
Okay.
unrelated to us, but certainly would impact us.
If they shut down the system, does that screw up any of our, the runway project and anything else we might be doing?
At
Or
this
is that
point,
just open guess
at this point,
Yeah.
I I can't answer what's gonna happen in the next 24 hours, let alone
It
something
could,
that's
because
that far
the guys won't have any employees to do the work.
Yeah.
I mean, I suspect though that anything like the runway project, anything that's got federal dollars behind it, that's gonna be made to happen, just because if those dollars go away in the economy, then, you know, because typically that's what the government does, is they start pumping money into projects to
Well, that's already
revitalize
started.
things. So I wouldn't anticipate that, but, you know, labor, I mean, there's all sorts of things that could come into play.
Okay, I was gonna say, that 4-page attachment that you sent out to some of the potential airline bidders and so on, that was kind of behind this thing, right? That the DOT sent out.
Yes,
Right.
yeah, it's just more specific
Right.
to our history,
I
our
presume
needs.
They've got a copy of that, what you sent out to them too,
Yeah.
right? Could you tell me what that is?
Those are the numbers that when carriers like operate, they don't, there's a whole system of reporting for airlines that apply to larger airlines. Smaller airlines may or may not be reporting. So that's just information that's coming out of the system as to what got reported.
Oh, okay, so
Um,
it's really not.
It's not accurate at all.
Okay.
Which is why I
was looking
sent,
through there and it just,
as part of everything,
okay,
additional information that is accurate. It's ironic that I have to submit quarterly reports that have the actual numbers in them, but they chose not to use what I'm reporting to them, they just chose to use something that's known to be inaccurate.
see, and they have Contour Airlines, never heard of that.
Contour is the
It-
business name of what used to be operating in here with the jet streams.
Oh, okay.
So
Okay,
we knew them as corporate flight management. They changed their corporate name to Contour. But now as you report historically, that name shows up, even though that wasn't the name they went by at that time.
okay. Thank you.
Any questions on any of the above?
Okay, thank you, Barry. Now, moving on. Let's move on to new business.
Old business. We changed it.
Well, that's not effective until next week, isn't it?
Oh, I know.
No, they.
But if you
They
wanna
already
do
made
it,
the adjustment.
We did it in this.
okay, then old business. Or unfinished business.
Yeah, the question I've got is, what's the status of the Ted Aaron's hangar deal? Has he got a hold of you again, or have you been working on that? It would seem to me as though that'd be a cheap way to add a hangar to throw up a contract and, you know, get the door fixed.
Thank you for bringing that up, because that reminds me of something that I forgot to include in my report.
Oh.
So, Air Choice One, who's a potential bidder, plans to bid with a Beech 1900, and they are asking if we have a hangar for them. So, to accommodate that, we would need to do something. They, in just kind of the conversation, said, if you charge us $5,000 a month for 2 years, would that make it possible for us to have a hangar? So, I need to respond to them before they submit their bid on that. But my idea would be to kind of work with our consultants and just kind of throw together a modification to Ted's hangar. $5,000 a month, 24 months, that's $120,000. And just see if those align as a project that, could potentially be accomplished so that they could have that. And then at the end of 2 years, we'd end up with something better than we have now. So if that makes sense, I will pursue that. I obviously won't commit to anything until, but I can at least give them a ballpark.
Then I see someplace in all the paperwork here and so on that Ted was still willing to,
In last month's report,
okay,
he reached out to me, still from Florida, that, you know,
making his
if we
building.
still
available.
needed something in the future, he'd still be willing to entertain, discussions on that, so.
Yeah, maybe it might not hurt to get a hold of them and say, yeah, we're talking about it or whatever, we're
Yep.
still interested.
Yep.
You know, as opposed to just leaving them hanging or whatever, would be my thought.
So thank you for reminding me on that, because I had intended to
Just try to
include
help.
that.
You know,
Any other old business, unfinished business? If not, we'll move on to new business. Barry, you wanna tell us what the item A is, approval of the airport fee schedule?
So I'm passing out now, so these are and the formatting's not pretty, 'cause normally I just send this in an email to, and I have already sent it in an email, just kind of in text. But these are the fees that we charge, air carriers to operate here. There's a lease for office space, a lease for basically baggage and lobby area, an electric utility reimbursement fee, landing fees per landing, and then a monthly or a daily handling fee essentially, that we bill it monthly. That basically covers our Part 139, firefighting. Most of our expenses kind of get rolled in that number, that's the biggest of what we actually end up billing. And then we have our fuel flowage fee that basically generates some revenue that, assuming they're buying fuel, they also incur. So when we updated this 2 years ago, we basically at that time adopted a 3% annual rate of inflation increase per year. So I just took that forward and applied it to the numbers that we had 2 years ago, with a couple exceptions. So office space, that number is 6% higher. Baggage and lobby area, 6% higher. I didn't adjust the electric utility reimbursement by the full 6% because if you look at that, that's around $3,000. And basically, they've got a couple laptops plugged in and a little bit of lights. It's hard to start justifying if that keeps ratcheting up. So I increased it, but not as much. The landing fees are up 6%, the handling fees are up 6%. And then this fuel flowage fee, that's been at 15 cents a gallon since it was, for roughly the last 20 years, since that fuel farm was put in. Given the expenses that we've been incurring with it, I thought it was maybe time to adjust that, so I increased that by 1 cent a gallon to 16 cents.
Well, if it hasn't been moved in 20 years, why would we go 2 cents?
At some point, fees are sometimes arbitrary, but yes, it could be 2 cents.
Well, we haven't even had the 6% increase in inflation in the last 2 years.
Right.
Correct, so I'm also trying to look at our budgets and how tight they are, and if we are only increasing these revenues by the rate of inflation, unfortunately, other things like healthcare costs that I'm seeing and needing to pay, those are going up faster than the rate of inflation, and that just creates a tightness. So I did that. Obviously it's for discussion, and again, I told people this is draft, and I would let them know if anything changed as a result of the board's actions.
I've got no problem with it.
How many gallons a year are we talking about?
It's on your back flyer here,
I figured it was somewhere,
It's-
but
someplace.
It can vary, so
Well, I
when
understand that.
Great Lakes was here, they never fueled here. Frontier rarely, public charters I mean, we've had months where they did 10,000 gallons, and we have other months where it was 0. So I mean,
All over the
there's
place.
definitely price
Yeah.
arbitraging going on. It's like,
Yeah,
if I can get it cheaper down in, Chicago, then I'll fuel there, but sometimes you can't always fuel there just because of other conditions. So it depends a lot.
And I think from what I've heard talking here, generally this past year, the flow of fuel has been down compared to the last several years, just because of the things you talked about.
It's actually
About the same?
about the same. I mean, it fluctuates from year to year. Last year, 2018, as opposed to 2019, was kind of a higher year, especially in August and September with the South Course opening in Arcadia Bluffs. We had a lot of late season traffic.
Okay.
This year we didn't see that, but this year's 2019's numbers was very comparable to 2017. So where we're seeing a decrease is in the avgas from other general aviation, piston aviation. That seems to be kind of a slow, long-term downward trend.
Okay. Any other comments? So Barry, I presume you want a okay to vote?
I would like a
Okay.
formal adoption of this.
Could I hear a proposal to adopt these proposed airline carrier fees for October 1, 2020 through September 30, 2022?
I'll make that motion.
Okay, do I hear a second? A second?
Is
Let's do
that,
a roll call on this.
is that with 1 cent or 2 cent?
On the bottom, just 1 cent right now. For the fuel,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Nobody seemed to wanna go with the 2 cents like it's suggested. So we'll do the 1 cent right now.
One comment I'll add is it's possible that carriers could submit bids for 4 years. Generally, it's a minimum of 2 years, but 4 years is not uncommon. And what I told them was to anticipate similar increases if they were going to do a 4-year bid and not assume that these would be set through that 4 years, but we're not gonna commit to what they are at this point.
Well, you got it pegged up there for the time frame for 2 years. So
Yes,
that's
yeah,
pretty
but-
straightforward, right?
If you're bidding 4 years, what do you
Right.
use as a number for those next 2 years? I just told them to anticipate similar increases.
Okay.
Right. Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
Ms. Goodman,
Yes.
Mr. Suda,
Yes.
Mr. Hall,
Yes.
Mr. Dents.
Yes.
Okay, moving on to item B. Our training grant. Barry?
So this was in your packet. Each year, we generally get 2 or 3 different grants from MDOT. 2 of the regular ones are this one, where there's up to $2,000 for our annual training. And then the other one that's primarily is our marketing grant dollars. And then the third can be for anything. The last couple of years, we've bought a mower and other things with it. This year, I've applied for that third one, the installation and training on the PFAS testing equipment that we've just got. This is the first of those grants to come, the paperwork to come through to us. This is for the ARF training, which I had mentioned earlier will be done in May. So we've had the same grant now for about 5 years. It's just kind of a standard
Formalities
process.
of going through the process.
Yep. So I would,
So moved.
Do I hear a second?
Second?
Okay. Do we have a roll call on that? Yes. Okay.
Money.
Roll call. Money, all the time, that's right.
Mr. Suda,
Yes.
Mr. Hall,
Yes.
Ms. Goodman,
Yes.
Mr. Peterson.
Yes.
Mr. Dents.
Yes.
Okay, item C. Gary, go
I
ahead.
discussed this earlier, talking about our ALP update project. that we need this independent fee estimate. This really just surfaced last week, so at this time, I don't have a formal document to present to you. I've reached out to Mead and Hunt, Pri Newhoff, our consultant, generally your consultant does these types of projects because they're the ones that work with your airport until you change consultants. Every 5 years, we go through an RFP process to identify our consultants basically for the next 5-year period. To be someone who can do an independent fee estimate, it can no longer be the state, and it can't be someone that bid on your services in the last bid period. There are 4 consulting companies that basically serve Michigan. So I reached out to Mead and Hunt, who's with Pri Newhoff. Those are probably the 2 biggest in the state. They did not bid on us last time. I'm anticipating this is going to be about $3,500. What I've gotten from them is a commitment that it would not exceed $5,000. So I would request that the board authorize the board chair to sign documents with Mead and Hunt not to exceed $5,000 for this independent fee estimate. This will be reimbursable under that ALP project. So that is the status of that and the action I would like to see the board take today.
What exactly are they doing when they give us an independent fee estimate?
They basically review the proposal of
Make sure
Pri
that
Newhoff,
it's reasonable?
what the hourly rates are, what the total scope of work
Reach
is,
standards.
that it's reasonable.
Okay.
So one is following the other. Somebody else follows that.
Chicken watching the hen.
Yeah.
Fox watching the hen.
Yeah.
Okay, can I hear a proposal, what Barry was asking for?
So moved.
And,
We don't have any choice, so I'll
I
second
know
it.
it, I know it. Okay, roll call please.
Mr. Dents,
Yes.
Mr. Suda, Mr. Hawes,
Yes.
Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
Ms. Goodman.
Okay. Now we're on number 11. Comments by board members?
I've got something if nobody else does. We are definitely in unusual times. It's very fluid, to say the least. It's changing by the hour, literally. Without getting on my soapbox and going into a diatribe of commentary that nobody wants to listen to, what I would say is this, is that look at it in a view of minimal exposure. For those that need to be here is one thing. This is a meeting we can call into. We have called into in the past. I would recommend for Susan to call in for the treasury aspect of the meeting, and then once we're done with that, you know, it doesn't even need to come. Just call in, do the question and answer, go over what has to be gone over for you, and that can be for the future. But at the moment, as far as committees, anything until this subsides, try to minimize to the maximum. Maximum of minimization is what I would refer to it as. Right now, currently for tomorrow's board meeting, and it's all subject to change, it's fluid. I'm currently looking at a live stream feed for a FaceTime live stream for public comment. We're under extraordinary times, and I'm looking at being there with myself and Jill, seeing if the board members would call in, have the board meeting and running that light. And again, that's the concept at the moment, subject to change. I'll have that discussion with Karen after the meeting is done. So, at any rate.
At any rate, thanks for the comments. I had that in my mind too, so we'll keep that in mind, watch and see where it goes and adjust accordingly. Any other comments? Yes.
Yeah, I thought I'd try to add a little humor to this. I had an idea, my sister's 80th birthday was in February, and I don't know if anybody's ever tried to get any 80-year-old birthday cards. Well, it looks like something you'd want to send to somebody in a nursing home. So I had Plan B, and I got her a 50, a 21, a 5, a 2, and 2 ones, added up to 80, put them all together, explained it on the last card, sent them to her. It cost me $25, it was worth every penny.
Ah, that's good, that's a good idea, yes.
Feel free to use it, whatever. Yeah.
Well, it's just like going along that line, just for a quick comment, you know, like birthday candles. Instead of, when somebody's 50 or
Sure.
55 or 60, instead of putting 60 candles on it, these nice ones now, go 1 through 10, and so on, so you buy 2 of them, you just have 2 candles on there, for 32, 62, whatever it is. So that's my 2 cents, that's it. Meeting adjourned.